Howdy, everybody. Dr. Andy Woods here. I'm back with my friend, colleague, fellow elder, associate pastor, Dr. Jim McGowan. I'm the pastor teacher here at Sugarland Bible Church. Today is July the 26th, 2024. This is Pastor's Point of View, number 310, and we have a prophecy update for you today. Here's our preview slide of the things that we're going to try to cover. The Gog-Magog alignment is crystallizing like never before, including in North Africa.
Yes.
The world is turning against Israel, just like God said it would.
Mm-hmm.
China is on the march. That's prophetically significant. Globalism is in full swing. And it sort of looks like we're moving into a time period of great persecution, particularly if Kamala Harris should win the White House, and we'll try to explain all of that today. But let's go ahead and start with Gog-Magog, and we're going to be making some points in this presentation. And you might wonder, what's the documentation for these? We recommend a book I wrote a few years ago called Middle East Meltdown, which will give you this documentation that we don't have a chance to cover in this show. But Iran equals Persia, Russia equals Rosh, Libya equals Put, and the Sudan equals Cush that you see mentioned in Ezekiel 38 and 39. So with all of that being said, notice our opening map here. This is a map of the infamous coming Ezekiel 38 and 39 invasion. One of the principal players in that invasion into the land of Israel is Persia or Iran.
Yes.
And boy, Iran is in the news constantly. Notice this article here from the Express, July 21st, 2024. It says, major warning, Iran, as Iran is just days. Can you believe this, Brother Jim? It's just days away from becoming a nuclear weapon threat. What's happening here?
U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has warned, quote, "We're not in a good place," as Iran is feared to now have the ability to produce enough weapons-grade material for a nuclear weapon within 2 weeks. This time span is normally referred to as breakout time and is the shortest ever noticed by U.S. officials. In recent months, Iran has taken bold steps to boost its production of fissile material as tensions between the West and the so-called new axis of power, including North Korea, China, and Russia, alongside Tehran, continue to grow. Mr. Blinken said on Friday as he appeared at the Aspen Security Forum, quoting, "Where we are now is not in a good place. Iran, because the nuclear agreement was thrown out, instead of being at least a year away from having the breakout capacity of producing fissile material for a nuclear weapon, is now probably 1 or 2 weeks away from doing that. They haven't produced a weapon itself, but that's something, of course, that we can track very, very carefully." U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, also at Aspen, said he has not seen a decision by Iran to move in the direction of building a nuclear bomb yet. The official added that since April, when Tehran launched its first direct attack on Israeli soil, the U.S. noticed, quote, "an uptick of public commentary from Iranian officials musing about that possibility, which got our attention."
Well, I hope it did get their attention.
I do too.
But this is what we've been talking about for a long time now. That Iran is plunging into this nuclear capacity that she's about to get. The world community seems completely and totally powerless, to stop it.
Yeah.
Prophetically, we think it's significant because Iran is one of the invaders of Israel in the last days. And so I think if the stage is being set for the fulfillment of Ezekiel's prophecies, we're seeing a very aggressive Iran in the last days. Remember, Brother Jim, it was Iran in mid-April, roughly, that launched, what was it, 300 projectiles
Yes,
from their
sir.
own country into the land of Israel.
That's right.
So Iran is not even working through her proxies anymore. The
Wow.
mask is off, and the world is getting very, very scary if you don't know Jesus personally.
Mm.
And this headline, I think, demonstrates that.
Yes, sir.
And it's a lot more than just looking at these principal players, these regional powers coming into existence. It's how they, in Ezekiel's prophecy, mentions them and how today they're cooperating with each other.
Yeah, that's
So you
right.
have to look at two things, their existence and their alliances.
Hmm.
And we have this map here with Rosh or Russia circled. And then also circled is one of the countries that hardly gets any attention from prophecy analysts for whatever reason, but it's Put, which we believe is Libya.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
how do we know, Brother Jim, just by way of review, that Rosh is Russia? Notice this quote from Wilhelm Gesenius. I think this goes back to about 1842.
Mm. Wow.
So this was long before Russia was a communist
Isn't that
nation
true?
and a nuclear superpower. But what does Gesenius say here?
He says it's a proper name of a northern nation mentioned with Tubal and Meshech, undoubtedly the Russians, who are mentioned by the Byzantine writers of the 10th century under the name the Ras, dwelling to the north of Taurus, as well on the river Ra or Volga.
So Gesenius, and keep in mind, we're not dealing with a lightweight here.
Not at all.
This is the father of modern day
Yeah.
lexicography, which is the science and art of compiling Hebrew dictionaries,
Yes.
essentially. I mean,
Mhm.
a scholar of great repute. Back in 1842, it says Rosh in Ezekiel 38 and 39 is Russia, the
Mhm.
Russians.
And nobody questioned it.
Nobody questioned it. I mean, he probably had some own doubts in his mind because Russia at that time was a Christian Orthodox country. And then also you have Put, who we think is Libya.
Mhm.
Why do we think Put is Libya? Well, Put is mentioned in the Table of Nations, Genesis 10, and Josephus in his Antiquities tells us where Put settled.
Yes, he does.
What does Josephus say here?
All right. Put also was the founder of Libya and called the inhabitants Putites from himself. There is also a river in the country of Moors which bears that name, whence it is that we may see the greatest part of the Grecian historiographer mention that river and the adjoining country by the appellation of Put, but the name it has now has been by change given it from one of the sons of Meshraim, who was called Libyos.
So, if this is right, that Russia in the remote north and then Libya there in the southwest uh, or Put is Libya, Rosh is Russia, Russia north, Libya southwest. I mean, does it stand to reason, Brother Jim, that if we're living in the time of the end, that number one, the two nations would be hostile towards Israel? Check, got that
Yep,
accomplished.
that's right.
And number two, that the two would cooperate with each other.
It's amazing. It's
So,
amazing.
with that being said, notice this recent headline from the railjournal.com, July 10th, 2024. Libya and Russia discuss reactivation of something called CERT. And they call this the Benghazi Project. What's
Mm.
going on here?
Libya's deputy transport minister, Mr. Fadlal Allah Ashur, and the head of the Railroad Project Implementation and Management Agency, Mr. Saeed Al-Kalani, have met with the Russian ambassador to Libya, Mr. Aidar Aganin, to discuss the reactivation of the U.S. Of the $3 billion project,
Wow.
$3 billion, that is,
With a B.
yeah, to build the 551-kilometer new line between Sirte and Benghazi. Russian Railways was awarded a contract in 2009 to deliver the new railway, but construction came to a halt following the toppling of the Gaddafi regime in 2011. Both parties agreed on the need for a clear roadmap and timeline for reactivating the Sirte Benghazi project.
So there's the cooperation
There it
between
is.
these two regional powers.
Yep.
Notice also here, Brother Jim, this map again, and here we've got this time Persia or Iran and Kush, who we believe is the Sudan,
Mm-hmm.
circled. Now, why do we think that Kush is the Sudan? Notice again this quote from Josephus.
And Josephus writes, "For of the 4 sons of Ham, time has not at all hurt the name of Cush. For the Ethiopians, over whom he reigned, are even at this day, both by themselves and by all men in Asia, called Cushites."
So, so the Hebrew there is Cush. Ezekiel 38 and 39 is one of the invaders. Josephus tells us where Cush settled, tracing Cush from the Table of Nations, Genesis 10, and
Yes.
Cush settled in what is called in his day Ethiopia.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of interesting, Brother Jim, in the New American Standard Bible, the New American Standard Bible translators are so confident that Cush, the Hebrew name, is Ethiopia that they don't even put Cush in the text. They put Ethiopia.
True.
And the modern designation Ethiopia, or the designation Ethiopia, is kind of misleading because the country back then, when Josephus wrote this, covered a larger space. And
That's
this is
true.
picked up by the Wycliffe Bible Encyclopedia. What do they say here?
All right, quoting, "The designation Ethiopia is misleading, for it did not refer to the modern state of Ethiopia. Cush bordered Egypt on the south, or modern Sudan."
All right, so Cush equals Sudan today. So if Iran and the Sudan are going to be involved in this invasion, shouldn't it stand to reason that the two would emerge as belligerent towards Israel? Check. Got that.
That's right.
And number two, that the two would cooperate with each other,
Yeah.
form alliances.
Just like God says.
Just like God said. And so we noticed this particular article from voanews.com, July the 21st. These are all, we make an effort, folks, to bring you fairly, recent articles.
Cutting edge,
Cutting
right?
edge. And notice what they say here.
Sudan's de facto leader, Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, received an Iranian ambassador Sunday and sent his own to Tehran, the government said, cementing a rapprochement after an 8-year rupture. Goes on to say Sudan broke off relations with Iran in 2016 in a show of solidarity with Saudi Arabia after the kingdom's embassy in Tehran was attacked following the Saudi execution of a prominent Shiite cleric. Sudan has also recently drawn closer to Russia, which experts say has reconsidered its previous relationship with the RSF, which stands for Rapid Support Forces, with which it had links through the mercenary Wagner Group.
So the Sudan and Iran, after this, what was it, rupture, 8-year rupture, are cooperating with each other like never before.
Yeah.
And then, oh, by the way,
Yeah.
Brother Jim, the article just happens to throw into the mix Russia, which
It
is one
sure
of the
did.
players as well. So Russia, Iran, the Sudan, Libya, all cooperating with each other, all best buddies, and all hating Israel.
Somebody should write a book about that, Pastor. Somebody has.
Somebody has, and the more important book is Ezekiel's prophecy.
Well, that's true, too.
Who saw all these things 2,600 years ago. So the
Wow.
Gog-Magog alignment is just crystallizing as never before. Any thoughts on that before we move on here?
Well, it's just, again, sometimes you read these articles and you think, I wonder, did they go to the Bible to get the resource material?
It's amazing.
It is.
All right, with that being said, let's go to our second bullet point here, the world against Israel. Zechariah 2,500 years ago was very clear that the world in the last days would turn against tiny Israel. Remind us of a couple of prophecies from Zechariah, who saw these things about 500 years before the time of Christ.
Wow. All right, reading Zechariah 12:3, "It will come about in that day that I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the peoples. All who lift it will be severely injured, and all the nations of the earth will be gathered against it." And then later in chapter 14, verses 2 and 3, For I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city will be captured, the houses plundered, the women ravished, and half of the city exiled. But the rest of the people will not be cut off from the city. Then the Lord will go forth and fight against those nations as when he fights on a day of battle.
So before her conversion, Israel's conversion nationally, Zechariah 12, verse 10, Israel will be regathered in unbelief. Check, we've got that. And the whole world will hate Israel. And that's what we're seeing
Maybe we should check that one too.
Yeah, let's check that box as well. The whole name of the game with the international community, if we can put up this map here, is the so-called West Bank, better called Judea and Samaria. And for some reason, the drunken nations of the earth think if that territory were taken away from Israel and given to the so-called Palestinians, that peace would break out in the region. After all,
it's worked so well so far, right?
Yeah. After all, let's put up the second map. As you just mentioned, it hasn't really worked real well in Gaza. The events of October the 7th have proven that. Gaza is that southwestern portion of the map. I mean, if giving that territory back to the Palestinians, and I don't even know if I like to say the phrase back to, because it makes it sound like the Palestinians own that land. They do not. It is Israeli land. Israel gave it up. 2004, southwestern portion of the map, Gaza. That's what everybody's talking about today, Gaza. Yep. As you know, Brother Jim, they had one and only one election there.
Yep.
2005, they elected Hamas, and ever since that point in time, it's been used literally to house terrorist cells and tunnels.
That's right.
To launch attacks into the land of Israel. So if it didn't work so well with Gaza, why in the world would we think it would work with the lighter brown area called the so-called West Bank, better called Judea and Samaria? But this is what the nations of the earth think. And give that area back to the so-called Palestinians, and peace will exist in the region. I guarantee you, folks, that peace will not exist in the region for the simple reason that you're going to upset God when you do that.
Yeah.
And we know that from the prophet Joel, one of our earliest writing prophets. What does Joel say in Joel chapter 3, verse 2?
Joel chapter 3, verse 2, and I failed to mention we are reading from the New American Standard 95 update. I will gather all the nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. Then I will enter into judgment with them there on behalf of my people and my inheritance, Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations, and they have divided up my land.
Boy, once you divide God's land up the way the world wants to do, you trigger God. And that's what's going to bring the events of the Great Tribulation period. That's when God says that's the last straw.
Yes, sir.
Now,
yes, sir.
The world against Israel, the world wanting to divide Israel's land. Notice this brand new article. This comes from the JNS. I believe that stands for the Jerusalem News Service, if I've got that right. And what does it say here? July the 19th, 2024. Top UN court, that's a global court, an arm of the United Nations. It's a legal ruling, in other words.
Yeah.
Tells Israel to end unlawful, notice that expression.
Yeah.
Boy, Israel must be doing something illegal. To end unlawful Judea and Samaria. We just had the map up there. That's the so-called West Bank.
Yep.
End unlawful Judea and Samaria occupation.
Yeah.
Is this an outworking of Joel's prediction that the world would turn against Israel in the last days? In other words,
sounds like it.
What's this article about?
Well, before I started, I think it's fascinating that they said Judea and Samaria.
Yeah.
Isn't that maybe that's a little Freudian slip?
Well, I think it's because it's from the JNS.
Well, that's true.
It.
Good point.
Yeah.
Here's the article, folks. The International Court of Justice, the principal judicial arm of the United Nations, located in The Hague, issued a non-binding 83-page opinion on Friday declaring Israeli occupation of Judea and Samaria to be unlawful. Quoting, the court reaffirms that the Israeli settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem and the regime associated with them have been established and are being maintained in violation of international law. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu denounced the ruling on Friday. Quote, the Jewish people are not occupiers in their own land, including in our eternal capital Jerusalem, nor in Judea or Samaria, our historical homeland, he said. Going on, quoting, no absurd opinion in The Hague can deny this historical truth or the legal right of Israelis to live in their own communities in our ancestral home. The Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs wrote that it infects the politics of the corridors of the UN in New York into the classrooms of the ICJ in The Hague, the ministry said.
Yeah, this line here, it injects the politics. See, this is not
Yeah.
a legal ruling. This is a political ruling.
Mm-hmm.
Masquerading as a legal ruling
Yeah.
is essentially what this is.
Exactly. And then the article goes on to say Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas, quote, warmly welcomed the court's opinion, which he called a triumph for justice, and urged the international community to compel Israel, the occupying power, to fully and immediately end its occupation and colonial project without conditions or exceptions. Then it goes on to say that Arsen Ostrovsky, CEO of the International Legal Forum, told JNS that the, quote, obscene decision will fuel anti-Semitism and reward Hamas for its October 7 terror attack. The opinion, quote, is yet another utterly baseless and politically motivated decision of the court masquerading as a legal opinion that will only further erode the ICJ's credibility and place it squarely as a tool of Palestinian lawfare, he said.
Lawfare. Using the legal system to achieve political results.
Unlawful results, right?
Yeah. Just like they've done with our former president recently.
Yes.
But here they're doing it internationally. And I wanted to highlight what this particular critic of this decision is saying correctly. Politically motivated decision of the court masquerading as a legal opinion.
Yes.
Now, why is this international ruling illegitimate? Well, we notice the slide here typically quote a couple of sources. One on the left there is the famous classic book, as far as I'm concerned, From Time Immemorial by Joan Peters. And then the gentleman on the right there is a Canadian lawyer by the name of, his last name is Gauthier.
Yes.
Let's start with Gauthier. Gauthier is a Canadian attorney who worked on a 20-year doctoral dissertation at the University of Geneva, who had hostile readers.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had to dot every I, cross every T to prove what he was saying, or they wouldn't have signed off on what he produced. But he demonstrates in that dissertation, which I believe now is a published book, that you can say whatever you want about the Jewish people.
Mm-hmm.
You can dislike them. You can disagree with them on policy grounds, political grounds, but here's something you can't say, that Israel is occupying.
That's right.
Because you can't occupy what you legally own.
Exactly right.
And this is what's missed in all of these articles that use the expression illegal, this ruling,
Occupier.
occupier, illegal. Somehow they think that the Judea and Samaria is Israel's illegally. He says it's not. And he traces his correct understanding of this back to San Remo Accords,
Yep.
the post in San Remo, Italy, the agreement among the post-World War I allies going right forward to 1947.
Yeah.
And a United Nations declaration. So keep Gauthier in mind when you keep hearing this expression, illegal,
Yes.
illegal. And then the other book is Joan Peters, who was sort of a very pro-Palestinian journalist who went over to that part of the world to prove that the Palestinians were there from time immemorial.
Mm-hmm.
And, Israel was somehow doing something illegal. And she was actually intellectually honest.
Yeah, imagine that.
And she said the more she studied the issue, the more she realized that the Jews bought that land from inflated prices. They own all of it.
Yep.
Everything was by the book.
Yep.
And so keep this in mind as you keep hearing illegal, 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 occupation, occupation, occupation. And once you understand this, you start to understand that this so-called ruling by the ICJ is just a political it's just a political perspective. It's got
Right.
nothing to do with the actual
Right.
law. So it's a political ruling by someone that doesn't really like the Jews over there,
Mm-hmm.
masquerading as a legal ruling.
Right.
I mean,
Exactly right.
this is not law. This is political activism masquerading as law.
Yeah.
And that's what we call lawfare.
Mm.
But it's just another example of the world turning against Israel in the last days. Would
Yeah.
you add anything to that?
Well, as I reflect on what you've been saying, it makes me think this, that, the Israel is like a splinter in the foot of the nations of the world.
Sure.
And the nations haven't been successfully able to remove that splinter. And that's what's accelerating all of this.
Yeah,
It's an irritant,
which is what the prophets
which is
indicate would
exactly what
happen.
God says.
And I think God designed it that way to show that only He and His 1,000-year kingdom is going to be able to bring peace
Amen, brother.
to that region and the rest of the world, for that matter.
Absolutely.
So here is another article. We have Japan piling on.
Yes.
This is from Reuters, July the 22nd, 2024. It says Japan imposes sanctions on 4 Israeli settlers. Now they go back to their old vernacular in the West Bank. What's happening here?
Japan imposed asset freeze sanctions on 4 individual Israeli settlers for violence against Palestinians in the West Bank, the government's top spokesperson said on Tuesday.
Now, when they say violence, I wonder what they're talking about. Are they talking about self-defense? What exactly are they talking about? But any type of
Yeah.
activity against the Palestinians is automatically called violence, and so let's impose asset-free sanctions.
Gosh.
Let's impose. Excuse me, I mispronounced that. Impose asset freeze sanctions on these 4 individuals.
Yeah. Probably just because they're physically present there.
That creates violence.
Yeah, that's violence because you're physically present
Yeah.
on your own property.
Yeah. So it's just another example of Japan piling on to this idea that, boy, you better get out of the
This is crazy.
so-called West Bank because we need it to a Palestinian state, the so-called two-state solution. Now here's King Charles. Charles in charge, as I call him.
Yeah.
Now that Elizabeth has passed, he has assumed the throne, and he's been a globalist going way back.
Oh, yeah.
And notice he's flexing his muscles concerning this so-called two-state solution. It says here, this is from the Jerusalem Post, July the 17th, 2024. King Charles says the UK is committed to secure Israel-Palestinian state. What's happening here?
King Charles said on Wednesday that his government was committed to a secure Israel as well as to establishing a Palestinian state. Quoting, "My government is committed to a two-state solution with a safe and secure Israel alongside a viable and sovereign Palestinian state," Charles said.
Which would take Israel's width and reduce it to less than 10 miles, which would prevent Israel really from being able to defend herself from foreign aggression, is really what all of these people think is going to bring peace to the region.
How can an individual, now folks, forgive me for this, but how can an otherwise intelligent individual think that a two-state solution is going to fix any problem?
Yeah, but they're all, as we say in church circles, singing off the same song sheet.
They sure are.
Now, these next couple of articles are sad because it affects our country. The United States of America is
Yeah.
under current
Yeah.
leadership is going down this exact same road.
Yeah.
By the way, that's not going to bode well for our country
No,
because of
sir.
what Genesis 12 verse 3 says. Can you remind us of that?
Yes, Genesis 12, verse 3, and I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed.
So, with that being said, here's an article from the Jerusalem Post. United States Senator Tim Kaine. Remember, this was Hillary's choice for vice president
Hmm.
when she was running against Trump in the general election going back to 2016. It says U.S. Senator Tim Kaine calls for, it's exactly what Prince Charles says, calls for
Yeah.
U.S. recognition of a Palestinian
Oh
state
boy.
following Knesset vote. What's going on here? This, by the way, is July 20th, 2024.
U.S. Senator Tim Kaine, Democrat from Virginia, called for the U.S. to recognize Palestine on Friday due to the Knesset vote on Wednesday to reject the establishment of a Palestinian state west of the Jordan River. In a statement posted to his website, Senator Kaine said that due to the Knesset's decision to deny the establishment of a Palestinian state, the U.S. should no longer condition recognition on Israeli assent, but instead upon Palestinian willingness to peacefully coexist with its neighbors. Peacefully coexist.
Yes, and so the Knesset in Israel has this vote. Hey, we don't want a terrorist cell. They didn't say that, but we don't want a terrorist cell on our own borders,
Yeah.
like Gaza, and so we don't want a Palestinian state west of the Jordan. I mean, put it somewhere else, but don't put it here.
Yeah.
And here comes Senator Tim Kaine,
Oh,
and
boy.
he's basically saying the U.S. should no longer condition recognition of this so-called Palestinian state on Israeli assent. In other words, you're going to get it whether you want it or not, because
Yep.
we're going to take it and we're going to ram it right down your throat.
That's
If
it.
I'm reading between the lines a little bit, that's what he's saying. By the way, this Senator Tim Kaine, I don't mean to be unkind, but I kind of get the impression that he is not the sharpest knife in the drawer, so to speak.
It's your kind.
Notice what he said about slavery not too long ago.
Well, this is what it says here. Democrat Senator Kaine claims United States created slavery and didn't inherit slavery from anybody. Well, there you go.
So slavery is an American
The
invention.
authority has spoken.
Yeah, I guess he's never read the book of Genesis, where it was in Exodus, where it was the Egyptians that enslaved the Jews. So America invented slavery. The truth of the matter is, slavery was a worldwide virus that America was bitten with long before America had existed. And here's something different about America, folks. We actually did something here to get rid of it. It's called the Civil War,
Yep.
the Emancipation Proclamation, and the structural change of our Constitution.
Yep.
Legally called the 13th and the 14th and 15th Amendments. And then if that weren't enough, we passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. We got into Lyndon Johnson's Great Society program, and we've done everything that a nation could ever do to get rid of the evil vestiges of slavery. That's what's unique about America. We did something about it.
You're right.
But America did not invent, this issue of slavery. And so when a guy says something like this, it doesn't surprise me that he can't analyze the Middle East issue very well either.
I think you hit that nail on the head.
Yeah. Now, as we speak, Brother Jim, President Biden has bowed out of the upcoming political general election on the basis of his health. Now, that's a little odd, isn't it? Because he's still going to be running the country all the way through inauguration, which is in January. So if he doesn't have the capacity to run for president, how could he have the capacity to run the government between now and then? What do you say about that?
Pastor, you asked the most insightful questions. I appreciate that. Yeah, that's a very good point, isn't it?
Yeah, and so who allegedly, supposedly has been picked, I think they're still trying to work this out, but Biden has selected his vice president, Kamala Harris, sometimes called Cackling Kamala. By the way, there's a lady on YouTube that imitates her and her laugh just perfectly. And if you need a little levity, you might look her up. But let's assume that Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris, is going to win the general election and become President of the United States. What's that going to do to the American-Israeli relationship?
Oh,
Well, notice this article again from jns.org. July the 22nd, 2024, it says potential Harris presidency could turn the screws on Israel.
Vice President Harris, now the frontrunner for the Democratic presidential nomination, will likely continue Biden's foreign policy on most issues, but might diverge when it comes to Israel, NBC News reported on Monday. While Harris initially expressed support for Israel in its war with Hamas following the terror group's invasion on October 7, she turned increasingly critical as the war dragged on. On March 3rd in Selma, Alabama, to commemorate the 1965 Civil Rights March, Harris dedicated the first 5 minutes of her speech to expressing sympathy for Gazans, holding Israel responsible for their condition. Quote, "Before I begin today, I must address the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. What we are seeing every day in Gaza is devastating," she said. "People in Gaza are starving. The conditions are inhumane," she said. And then there's a little aside comment here that says, reports of a full-scale famine turned out to be untrue. In June, the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification admitted its dire predictions had been incorrect. But she goes on and says, quoting, "The Israeli government must do more to significantly increase the flow of aid. No excuses. They must open new border crossings. They must not impose any unnecessary restrictions on the delivery of aid," she said. While she also said that the Hamas threat to Israel must be eliminated and the hostages returned. Those statements seemed perfunctory in comparison. Quote, "Her forceful delivery went viral with thousands of people posting her comments online and a number of media outlets writing about them," NBC News reported. The first draft may have been even harsher, as NBC News reported that officials at the National Security Council had toned it down.
Wow.
Later in March, Harris opposed Israel's plan to invade Rafah, the last stronghold of Hamas in the southern Gaza Strip, although not doing so would have enabled the terror group to survive.
So here she is running around making speeches anti-Israel
Yeah,
that are, first of all, have to be watered down,
yeah.
and secondly, are factually wrong. And then I guess she's against the plan to invade Rafah, which is the last stronghold of Hamas, meaning Israel, you can't win this.
Yeah.
You can't root out Hamas. So, God forbid she becomes the president of the United States. I mean, what in the world is that going to do to American-Israeli relations? And what does that forebode for our country in light of Genesis 12, verse 3, where God says, "I'll bless those who bless you, and those who curse you, I will curse." I mean, her potential election to the presidency will just increase Zechariah's prophecy of the world, including one of its only allies,
Yeah.
America, turning against Israel. You're going to say something?
Yeah, it's going to expedite everything.
Yes. Now, House Speaker Johnson, a Christian, praise God, this man, at least on this issue, is the Speaker of the House, is speaking up about this. So notice this particular article from, what is this, 7, or I guess Israel National News. This is very recent, July the 23rd, 2024. Speaker Johnson slams Vice President Harris's decision to boycott Netanyahu's speech. Now, recently, in the last couple days, Netanyahu arrived in the United States.
Yeah.
Was Vice President Harris there to greet him at the airport? Nope. And then he has to speak in front of the House of Representatives because the other branches of government controlled by the other party won't have him.
Yep.
Was Vice President Harris available for that big speech? Nope. Even though she's supposed to be there as the vice president sitting right next to the Speaker of the House.
Yep.
So she's boycotting his speech. It
Yes.
shows her anti-Israel flavor.
Yes.
Why are they doing this, Brother Jim? Well, can anybody say Michigan?
Mm.
Michigan is a swing state. Dearborn, Michigan. There's a
Mm.
reason we call Dearborn Dearbornistan. It's Michigan, Dearborn and Michigan has been taken over by Muslims who
Oh,
are typically
absolutely right.
anti-Israel. So she's doing a lot of these things because they think that by doing this, they're going to swing Michigan in her favor
Yeah.
in the Electoral College in the general election. And Speaker Johnson ain't having it. And so what does he say here?
Republican members of the U.S. House of Representatives held a press conference following their weekly meeting on Tuesday, during which Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, who's a Republican from Louisiana, criticized Vice President Harris for not planning to attend Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's address to Congress on Wednesday. Turning to Vice President Harris, the Speaker admonished, quote, "It's outrageous to me and inexcusable that Vice President Harris is boycotting this joint session. This is a historic moment. It's an important moment for the country. The gravity of this situation cannot be overstated. And yet, Vice President Harris will abandon her seat. As you all know, as the Vice President and as the President of the Senate, she is supposed to be seated next to me at the rostrum. She will not be there because she refuses to attend. She needs to be held accountable for that. She needs to be asked very serious questions about why." He continued, "They went down the roster to see who else would sit in the seat. Senator Patty Murray, Democrat from Washington, declined the opportunity as well. She will also boycott the event. They landed on Ben Cardin, Democrat from Maine, who's retiring from the Senate, so has little political risk. The idea that they're making political calculations when our ally is in such dire straits, fighting for its very survival and fighting back against the horrific attack in October, is unconscionable to us. America's relationship with Israel has always been bipartisan, and it should stay that way," he concluded.
So here's one of our allies fighting for her very existence.
Yeah.
Suffered a horrific attack October the 7th, which is the equivalent of our 9/11,
Yes.
if not worse.
Yes.
And they can't find somebody to show up in the House to watch Netanyahu speak, and Harris won't show up. They try to find someone else. He won't show up. Try to find someone else. She won't show up. So they settle on some guy that nobody's even heard of
Yeah.
because they're making a political calculation about Michigan. I mean, I thought support for Israel was supposed to be bipartisan, which is what Speaker Johnson points out. Notice we have this little slide here that kind of captures Johnson's comments. It says House Speaker Mike Johnson speaks out against Kamala Harris's boycott of Netanyahu's speech. Remind us what he says here.
Yeah, he says again, "It's outrageous to me and inexcusable that Kamala Harris is boycotting Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech." He goes on again, we've said this, but Kamala Harris will abandon her seat. She will not be there because she refuses to attend. She needs to be held accountable for that. The idea that Democrats are making political calculations when our ally is in such dire straits, fighting for its very survival, is unconscionable to us.
So what are we trying to say, folks? We're trying to say the world, including the United States, particularly under the influence of the Democratic Party, is turning against Israel, just like God said every nation.
Just like God said.
In the last days.
Yeah.
Let's go to our third bullet point, and this has to do with China. The kings of the East are rumbling, Brother Jim.
They are indeed.
And here notice our tribulation judgments chart. We want to draw people's attention to trumpet judgment 6 and bowl judgment number 6. Can you remind us what trumpet judgment number 6 says? And if you don't mind just reading those two underlined verses, verse 14 and verse 16 of Revelation 19.
All right, we're reading from Revelation chapter 9, I
Excuse
believe
me,
it
chapter
is,
9. I had the.
verses 14 and 16.
Yeah.
And it says here, one saying to the sixth angel who had the trumpet, release the four angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates. And in verse 16, and the number of the armies of the horsemen was 200 million. I heard the number of them.
So that would be the beginning of a process releasing an army of 200 million from east of the Euphrates River.
Yeah.
That would be Trumpet Judgment 6. Sort of the end of the process is Bowl Judgment number 6. And we find that in Revelation chapter 16, verse 12. What does that say?
Revelation 16:12, the sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river the Euphrates, and its water was dried up, so that the way would be prepared for the kings from the east.
So it's talking about this army of 200 million coming from the east, the remote east.
Mm-hmm.
They have to pass through the Euphrates River, which is dried up under Satan's power when these events happen. It's kind of interesting. The Euphrates River is drying up right now.
Something in it.
Yeah, that's interesting. So apparently that expedites the path of this giant army from the east. They're on horseback, so it doesn't look to me like they're demons.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are trying to tell me these are demons. Well,
Yeah.
I think they're demonically influenced, but they're
Certainly.
people.
Yeah.
The demons are in the fifth bowl judgment, which come out of the abyss.
Yeah.
This is a different group here coming from east of the Euphrates. Let's put up our map, if we could, of the Euphrates River. The Euphrates River is that geographical marker that separates the Far East from the Middle East.
Yeah.
And
That's
so
right.
they're moving into, according to Bible prophecy, northern Israel for the final battle called the Battle of Armageddon. And for a long time we have thought that this giant army, these kings of the East, could very well be China.
Mm-hmm.
In fact,
Yeah.
John Walvoord, the dean of all prophecy students, said that in his 1966 Revelation commentary. What does he say here?
All right, reading the last sentence there. The rising power of parts of the Orient in our day in countries such as Japan, China, India, as well as lesser nations, makes such an invasion a reasonable prediction.
So we said back in 1966
Yeah.
that Japan, China, and
Yeah.
India could be part of this giant army. Well, if all of this is true, should we not see, Brother Jim, a belligerent China in the last days? Should we also not see an interest in China in the land of Israel?
Yep.
Since they're going to be one of the invaders, probably at a slightly different time than the Gog-Magog invaders, but they
Yeah.
will still, in the course of the tribulation period, come into northern Israel for that
Mhm.
final battle called the Battle of Armageddon. So it's no great shock, is it, that we have this article from the BBC?
Yeah.
China seeks to unite Palestinian factions with reconciliation deal. So China is in the two-state solution business, where they're trying to get these different Palestinian factions that are kind of at war with each other to kind of, hey, let's all come together
Mm-hmm.
because the real enemy is Israel. That's what this article is about.
Well, and they need, not only that, Pastor, but they have to pass through
Yes.
their territory to get to Israel.
There you go.
Well, here's the article. Rival Palestinian factions, Hamas and Fatah, have signed a declaration agreeing to form an interim national reconciliation government for the occupied West Bank and Gaza after the war with Israel in a meeting brokered by China. China's foreign minister and Hamas officials have said. Representatives from the group, along with 12 other Palestinian factions, pledged to work for unity after 3 days of talks in Beijing. Fatah has yet to comment on it, though its representative Mahmoud al-Alul thanked China for its support of the Palestinian cause following the announcement. But the lack of success of past deals has not deterred China, which wants to broker peace in the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict and sees Palestinian unity as key to that outcome. Beijing previously hosted talks between Hamas and Fatah in April. Quoting, China and Palestine are trustworthy brothers and good partners, said Foreign Minister spokesperson Mao Ning on Tuesday, adding that China would, quote, work tirelessly with all relevant parties towards unity and reconciliation. Reconciliation is an internal matter for the Palestinian factions, but at the same time, it cannot be achieved without the support of the international community, said Foreign Minister Wang Yi after the declaration was signed, in remarks reported by Reuters news agency. China's support for Palestinian causes stretches back to the era of Chinese Communist Party leader Mao Zedong, who sent weapons to Palestinians in support for so-called national liberation movements around the world. Mao even compared Israel to Taiwan, both backed by the U.S., as bases of Western imperialism. In their remarks on the latest conflict, Chinese officials have even President Xi Jinping have stressed the need for an independent Palestinian state.
Now that's worth rereading. Chinese officials and even President Xi have stressed the need for an independent Palestinian state. So they're getting involved in this so-called two-state solution
big
as well.
time. Yeah, Mr. Xi has also sent his top diplomats to the Middle East for talks and recently hosted Arab leaders for a conference in Beijing. The conflict has also erupted at a time when China has ambitions to play a more direct role in international politics and has presented itself as a better suitor for the world than the U.S. Since then, it has promoted a vision of Chinese-led world order while criticizing what it sees as the failures of U.S. hegemonic leadership.
So as the U.S. declines, China is rising.
Yep.
She has a great interest in dividing the land of Israel, and apparently she's had this interest, according to this article, for a long time.
Quite a while.
It's just kind of reaching a culmination, a boiling point here. And keep in mind that this is a brand new article. This is July the 23rd, 2024. Well, Brother Jim, does China really have the technological sophistication for an invasion like this? By the way, a lot of people criticize me for laughing in the midst of these headlines. I'm not laughing because I'm trying to make sport of this. I mean, this is serious stuff. It's just these headlines to me are just so unbelievable.
Yeah.
Laughing is my only coping mechanism that I have left other than prayer. But notice this article from the Epoch Times, again, very recent, July the 8th, 2024. China's robot dogs.
Wow.
An army of 200 million on horseback. Maybe John saw something like this, these robot dogs, I'm not sure. China's robot dogs carrying machine guns. Did you know about Chinese robot dogs carrying machine guns?
No, not in my wildest imagination.
To enter the battlefield within 2 years. They're 2 years away from this technology.
Wow.
Here's how it will look. What does this article say?
Armed forces around the world use robots for conducting search and rescue operations and defusing bombs, among others. What if they were deployed as soldiers with a machine gun in a war zone? Is this scene out of a science fiction movie? It may have been the case a few decades back, but now China is rapidly developing them. According to reports, they will be inducted within 2 years. This is added to, I think this probably supposed to be introduced, but this is added to a growing arms race between China and the Western countries. Autonomous weapons are being developed rapidly across the world, even as war moves to the cyber and space domains. This robotic dog model has been manufactured by the Chinese company Unitree Robotics. It was displayed by the People's Liberation Army last month during its joint exercise with the Cambodian Armed Forces. Many of the defense analysts pointed out that the Chinese are ahead of the other countries in terms of developing autonomous weapons. This particular robot has a machine gun that is mounted on it and can function like a normal soldier. Defense analysts point out that the Chinese are building autonomous weapons at a pace which is 4 to 5 times faster than the United States.
Wow. 4 to 5 times faster.
Wow.
So they're way ahead of the military
Yeah.
technological curve.
Mm.
Well, folks, in this particular pastor's point of view, we've covered the Gog-Magog alignment, the world against Israel, the rise of the kings of the East. And what are we going to do, Brother Jim? We still have to cover globalism and persecution. Well, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to come back for part 2, and we'll cover those at that time. We want to thank you all for watching, sharing pastor's point of view. If there's people out there, Brother Jim, that are just terrified by these headlines because they don't know Christ personally, what would you tell them?
Well, quite simply, the Bible says that today is the day of salvation. God has made a provision whereby you can have a personal relationship with Him through His Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, who died on the cross to pay the penalty of your sin. So if you will place your faith, trust, and confidence in Jesus Christ for the safekeeping of your soul, Jesus and God the Father both guarantee you that you will have an eternal place in heaven with Jesus at the end of your physical life. And not only that, but you then qualify for the next big event on the horizon for a believer, which is the rapture, where Jesus returns to take away His body, the church of Jesus Christ, home with Him into heaven. And we would encourage you to seriously contemplate that. The Bible says that today is the day of salvation, and our life is but a vapor, and it can disappear at any time. So please don't put this decision off.
So eventually we're going to get to the point where these things aren't just going to be stage setting.
Exactly.
What we're covering is stage setting.
Yes.
But they're going to be actual fulfillments of prophecy, primarily in the 7-year tribulation period.
Yes.
And one of the great promises of many that we have in Jesus is that we'll be taken to heaven via the rapture before the 7-year tribulation period transpires. And you become locked into that promise among countless other promises God gives us by trusting in the work that Jesus did for us 2,000 years ago. We trust that many people, within the sound of our voice are doing that even as we speak.
Amen.
Well, we'll be back with part 2 covering globalism and persecution. So we'll see you next time on Pastor's Point of View. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. God bless you.
God bless.